What's up, world? This is Ryan Banta. Hey, a while ago, I got a bunch of questions asked from Jason about what my thoughts were on a number of different topics. Jason's working on some really, really interesting things when it comes to ACL tears in relation to or correlation to concussions and doing some groundbreaking work out there for his particular field. So he asked me to answer a few questions and things like that. So question number one is, what's my background with all of this stuff? Well, I've been a coach for 18 years. I've coached at my high school, Parkway Central, with the girls team pretty exclusively. I also played football at the college level, or participated in football at the college level and ran track. I played rugby for the St. Louis Bombers, which is one of the high-level rugby squads in the United States for a couple of seasons. And I coached football, and now I coach girls cross country and track and field. Over those 18 years, a lot of my experience and background was gained on the job. I think good coaches, one of the things you have to do is you have to continually improve and continually to smooth out those rough edges that you have. For me, it required gaining a lot of access or background knowledge through experience, but also the ability to find experts in the field who I can lean on in times of trouble, to learn from and to gain experience and knowledge from over time, especially in events that I had no experience with. So for example, when it comes to distance running, there weren't a lot of experiences that I had beyond being in the fourth grade and running like a 5:58 mile or something like that in the little presidential test that we used to have for my understanding of distance running. And I knew that, coming into the experience, that I was going to have a couple of really, really outstanding distance runners, both Emily Sisson, who you guys probably know, who now is world ranked, Diane Robinson, who's the SEC record holder in the 5,000 meters at the conference meet, and then Kathleen Thompson, who is KU's captain while she was there for their cross country squad. So I had all three of these girls at the same time, and that's a huge responsibility. Old Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And so I knew that I had to expand my education and my knowledge into other areas. And one of the things that you need to understand is just because you don't have experience with a particular subject or a particular type of event or event group, that doesn't mean that you can't eventually learn that. It doesn't mean that you can't get good at it. And I know that all of us kind of understand that, but I'd like to sell you on the idea that in some respects, not having that background as an athlete actually allows you to take in a lot more information and look at it without bias. As coaches, we have a lot of what I would call intellectual bias that kind of steers the direction of research and things that we want to go. And when looking at the book, the Sprinters Compendium that I put together, that was an obvious thing that I wanted to try to avoid was, selling these ideas that I particularly felt strongly about and excluding all of these other ideas that have shown in certain places, in certain environments with certain athletes to be really, really good. My background is political science. That's what I got my degree in, and I worked on a number of political campaigns and had a job offer for someone who was one of the most powerful people in the world. And I turned that job down because I didn't feel like I wanted to work for people that didn't necessarily fit the way I looked at the world. They said they did, but maybe behind closed doors, they weren't behaving the way that they promoted themselves to be. And so I didn't want to attach my name to that. And I also felt like that wasn't where I wanted to be just yet. So I had this kind of emptiness, this hole in my life where I felt like I wasn't fulfilling myself in meaning. Like I didn't feel like when I was waking up every day that I had a purpose. And coaching allowed that. Coaching immediately became that. And I realized that education in general was something that I really felt passionate about. I didn't know how to necessarily get that across. I didn't have all the classes. I didn't have all the skill sets yet, but I knew that's where I wanted to go. So I've been coaching at Parkway Central for 18 years. And in my 18 years, I've gone through a number of different transformations. And if I could give anyone that's listening some suggestions, is don't be afraid to go through those transformations. Some of the most difficult and challenging things you're going to go through dealing with athletes or parents or other coaches or injuries or misfortune, that just things happen in the world of sports. Those are opportunities for us to grow and to get better. And even if you feel like you were justified in a decision or a choice or an action or a lineup or a training plan or how you handled a particular assistant coach or another coach on another team, and it didn't work out the way that you wanted. And you have to think about this in the most critical sense. What could I have done differently to make that situation be better? If I could go back and fix it, what would I have done? And sometimes it's not necessarily changing what you do, but changing how you communicate what you do. So it's perception versus intention, right? So those are things that, as I've gone through as a coach, I've gone through these multiple metamorphoses as a coach. And the reality is that there's going to be some people who are just not going to buy in. They're not going to believe in what you're doing. They don't think that you are an expert or a sage advice person. And the reality is that none of us really are experts. We just have an accumulation of wisdom or thought or experience that allows us to help people avoid major pitfalls. But that doesn't mean that we still don't run into those things. And so as a coach, my goal has always been to try to put a competitive group in place that's a group that's willing to work hard, and we're going to work hard enough to beat other people and create separation points. I knew that right away, but I didn't know necessarily like what's the best way to do that, how to manage that, how to create that, how to get people on board. So as we move through this, you know, it's important to understand that. So the second question I got asked was, and it kind of leads into this, is what are some of the key aspects when training an adolescent track and field athlete? How do you develop culture within that type of team? Well, first of all, most adolescents, when they come to track and field, have not done track and field. In fact, to be honest, the most successful kids I've had on my team that have had sustained success as a track and field athlete had done no more track and field beyond PE class or running in a mile club or doing some of that intramural type of stuff. Most of the people who have come to me with some sort of club background or some kind of experience previously, that's been more difficult. And I imagine that that's only exacerbated if you're a college coach, because you're not just dealing with what the kid was doing in high school, what they now kind of understand as a young adult, their club coaches, their parents, and everybody else who is trying to recruit that kid. It's a battle. So for me, with adolescents who typically come into my program and typically have success, there's a lot of education that you have to put down first. Like, this is what the sport is. Breaking down misconceptions about the sport of track and field. Most of the time when people come to you that are adolescents in track and field is not their number one sport, number two sport, number three sport. It may just be conditioning for what they think is their main sport. And you have to understand that they're coming to you with that attitude. And your job isn't to force the sale. Your job is to make them realize the value of the sport, the excitement of the sport, and the good things about the sport of track and field. The other thing you have to realize is in many ways, you're dealing with athletes now more than ever who are adolescents that have no physical background whatsoever. So they have no experience. And because they have no experience, you have to teach things that you would oftentimes think in the past were pretty obvious. And that doesn't just mean about your mental preparation for practice, how you handle competition. It's how you train. What is the body going through? Like if you have kids that their first time seeing a track is the first couple of days of track and field practice, they're going to have delayed onset of muscle soreness. And so in those first few weeks, most of your athletes are the most susceptible to injuries. And because of that, you have to handle it in a way where you're alternating, you know, training with recovery and those kind of things. The other thing is that sometimes these athletes don't realize that if you're a track and field athlete, you're going to be at practice every day. Now, that doesn't mean you're going and grinding every day. That would be a bad and a poor choice, but they've got to be there. And the value of what's happening and telling them about this is how the body adapts. This is what the body's going through. Because in track and field, if you're not able to compete nearly at 100%, it's a way different experience in the sport of track and field than competing in any other sport at less than 100%. Like in football, in a football game, if you're at 85%, you still got another 10 guys in the field with you that can pick you up And because you've got your general assignment that you have on the field of play, you can still pretty much do your job. And if you're way better than that one person or two people in front of you, you can still be achieving at a high level. But in track and field, you got at least 8 other people or 7 other people on the track with you. And if you're not at 100%, there's somebody on that track because they got probably a pretty close time because most races are power seated. So they're pretty much the same kind of athlete as you. You're going to get exposed. And it's very humbling. And when you get exposed, that's sometimes where injuries prop up and happen. So we have to be very careful with how we introduce these athletes into the world of track and field. So for every athlete that I have that's a rookie, and it doesn't matter if they're a senior in high school or they're a freshman just getting out of 8th grade, we always train them at a smaller volume of work. And then sometimes you may even benefit from deciding a strategy in which you're choosing to train them in. So, for example, as many of you know, I'm a big proponent of starting with the 400 as your training starting point and then going this way or this way as an athlete reveals themselves. As you guys know, Tony Holler is saying, let's start with 10-meter flies and work our way up as we get into shape, but we never go away from that absolute or maximum speed. If you're working with a younger athlete, you may want to go with those real small volumes, but then they might not be able to handle the intensity at full speed, especially with upright running mechanics, which is where an athlete tends to get hurt. Now, thankfully, in our program, in 10 years, we've had 2 hamstring pulls in 10 years. Because we do all these things to build and prepare the athlete to get them ready into a program. Now, the second part of this culture is how to deal with an adolescent is also how to build culture. So in our program, to build our culture, we explain what our culture is out of the gate. Day number 2, we talk about team rules and we talk about how you practice correctly. Because those are the things that are the structure to everything else. And so those are the bedrock philosophies that we have. You need to know how to practice correctly. You may not understand it, but I'm going to at least explain it in words to you. And you're going to have a copy, everybody on the team that understands this is what you do to get things done in our practice. And then these are the rules that you have to adhere by. Because if you're not here every day, if you're not on time, you're not warming up on time, you're not working out, you're not doing something in the off season, you don't have to run track and field, but you probably should be doing a sport, especially as a female athlete, because they mature much earlier than dudes. And because they mature much earlier than dudes, they have a tendency to go backwards in their physical development because Mother Nature wants a female athlete to do something versus a guy who is in there for the long haul, and they're probably not going to see immediate success. So it's delayed success. And so you have to explain the realities to these children on your team to set the culture of expectations. And then as a coach, don't paint yourself into a corner with hard and fast rules, but have a group of rules based on when those things are broken. So that way you have some flexibility in how you respond to the different kids, because every situation, missing a practice could be 100 different things, and those 100 different things require a different response as a coach to missing practice. If they're injured, or there's a death in the family, or they forgot to do their work, or they missed a job, or they forgot to bring their clothes, or whatever. Like, all of those things require a different conversation and a different response individually. So John Wooden always talked about that. I'm not going to treat you equally. I'm going to treat you fairly. And the reality is an equal response to everything isn't always fair because it requires a different conversation. So the other things that we do is we try to make track and field fun. Not fun because it's easy. No. Not fun because it's easy. We build all the extra things about, hey, if you're a part of this team, we're going to do team themes on every big meet that we have during the school year. That's kind of during the week. We're going to do a team breakfast. We're going to do things where we have a big sister and a little sister. We're going to do a secret track buddy. We're going to do contests for interval cards where you can get out of a mile run or a lift in the weight room or an interval on practice. We're going to celebrate successes for the slowest kid to the fastest kid with PR candy bars. We're not afraid to have food be a part of fun, you know, obviously within the legal ramifications of allergies and all this kind of stuff. We're going to celebrate the history of our program. We're going to honor the kids that do really cool things. You know, in my program, I don't have a top 10 list. I have what's called an all-world list. So basically what it is that as a kid performs, we add them to our history book And so what happens is now I have like 100 plus kids in the mile and the 100-meter dash and the 800 that are listed on this performance list. So it's like a qualifying standard to get into the history book. And what that is a little carrot that allows that athlete to reach to that first performance level to get to what would be a high school above average athlete. And then as they climb the list, we celebrate that. You know, we build a culture of expectations. You've got to be there and drive the bus for your athletes. If you're not there in the off season, they're not going to be there. You got to do your best to keep things in house. So these are all things that you do to develop culture. And then you got to figure out ways to be successful. So what is your philosophy? If they don't know it, they're not going to own it. You have to own it. You have to let them know it so that they can own it. And so whatever that may be, for Tony Holler, we're going to be the fastest darn program we can possibly be in the 100 and 200 and 4x1. And I'm going to give my sprinters days off and I'm going to feed the cats. For me, I want to do the critical amount of work for the specific event. And so for me, we're going to start in the middle of the events that we have. So you have 19 events in high school track and field. I'm going to start right in the middle. And so what that allows me to do is I can take my athletes this way, and I can cover the most. I'm going to have a track and field team, you know, so we're not just going to be good at one or two things. We're going to try to be good at everything. And my assistant coaches are going to be in that process. And I want my assistant coaches to have at least 5 athletes in each event group that can be successful. Now, do we get that every year? Of course not, because you can only coach the raw materials that you have. But if you do that, you're eventually going to be able to shift kids around to where they can be successful in something. Some of our best discus throwers were also on all-state relays, sprint relays. Some of our best distance runners are also some of our best sprinters. Why? Because they're just really good athletes. And so we want to cover all those bases so that the culture of our program is something special. With these big sisters that we have in our program, we don't necessarily really highlight captains. We highlight people who have been in our program that then help usher in the younger generations of girls in our program. And so their job is to teach them how to lift right. Their job is to teach them how to get through workouts. Their job is to help them learn how to do technique and drills. Because at me as one coach with 70 plus girls in a warm-up, that's hard for all of us to catch. So those big sisters become extraordinarily important for teaching the girls the ropes and the expectations of our program. And we're not a fitness club. You can't be a fitness club. Your job is to wear your school colors and represent them through your physical, competitive accomplishments. Now, you will get fit through the sport of track and field, but we're not here to be a fitness club. So that's some ways that I kind of develop culture. Now, third question. How does your strength training differ between your sprinters, middle distance runners, and long distance runners? Well, first and foremost, every kid in my program, every single kid in my program does a Olympic lift variation, deadlifts, squats, bench presses. Every girl in my program does that. Now, why is that? Because that covers the most motor units you could possibly have as a coach. If you hit up all those things and that's all you can get done, you're getting most of the things you need done to build a robust, confident, balanced athlete that can do a lot of things. Now, how does that help your distance runner? You're like, my distance runner doesn't need to be doing a power clean or a squat. Well, guess what? Your distance runner will be a lot more effective if they don't get stress fractures or stress reactions because their skeletal system is much stronger. Well, how do you make the skeletal system stronger besides having a good diet and paying attention to volumes and loads of runs on hard surfaces? What else can you do? How do you increase the bone density? Well, you do that through weight training. Also, for female athletes in my program, they get a hormone spike, an HGH spike naturally from lifting weights under weighted resistance training. And so believe it or not, that extra fatigue that a guy might get from hitting the weight room really hard with a woman athlete, with a female athlete, that HGH, that human growth hormone spike actually is restorative. So if you have a female athlete, they should be weight training a lot farther into the season than a guy should be. Now, where is the variation in the differences? Well, the variation in the differences in the weight training typically comes in the off seasons or we're wanting to focus on some of the specific things because we have more time in the weight room, especially in the winter. Because, the winters, depending on where you're at, can be pretty gnarly. And you aren't guaranteed to be able to get outside all year long. If you're above, the state of Arkansas, you're going to probably have snow for a significant portion of your high school track and field season. And not all of us have indoor facilities. There isn't one indoor track in the entire St. Louis metro area of 3.5 million people. So what do? Well, you got the weight room as a guarantee, and that's where you have your fun. That's where you have your variation. But after we get through bench press, deadlift, squat, and Olympic variation, okay, and we have all of those things, then what you do with the different groups of athletes, your distance runners, your jumpers, your sprinters, your hurdlers, your throwers, the ancillary lifts are where you play with the variation. So a thrower might need an Olympic crowbar, or a jumper may need to do some more box jumping or plyometric work in the weight room if there's a place and a surface available to them. It's 100% normal. A distance runner might spend more time in hypertrophic lifting because they have slower contacts than a sprinter does, and so it's okay to do that. And the lifting is more restorative and skeletal building than it is really developing an explosive human being through those ancillary lifts. It's more of a supportive measure. If it's a sprinter and they're a hamstring centric sprinter, you might be doing more single leg lifts. And if they're a quad centric sprinter, you might be doing more double leg, or what they like to say fancy language, bilateral lifting. Okay. So these are ways that you can vary up your lifting in a high school situation, but you don't want to go crazy. If you have 1,000 different workouts, first of all, those weeks that you're trying to teach all these new lifts becomes really problematic. So when you bring in a new lift into the weight room with your high school track and field athletes, it should be a variation of a lift that they've already done. So instead of stopping bench press and go do something else, still continue to do bench, but maybe now you have a plyometric bench, or now maybe you're balancing and doing dumbbells on a Swiss stability ball and doing bench press from there. Maybe you're doing an incline bench. Maybe you're doing a decline bench. Who knows? It depends on what you're trying to do for your particular athlete, but you do the same base lift with a twist. And so that's how you develop that. So question number 4. How do you develop injury resilient adolescent athletes? Well, the first thing is we spend a lot of time warming up. And so if athletes come and they don't come on time, and they don't warm up on time, and they don't bring proper gear, and they don't bring proper shoes, and they're not always at practice, or they're the first one out, or they miss all the time, or they don't do any conditioning, guys, you can't do a lot about that. So the only thing that you can take care of are taking care of the athletes that obey and abide by those basic things that you need, which is show up on time, don't cut corners, have good attendance. Okay, now once you've got those basic things out of the way, and realize that some athletes are going to open themselves up to injury because they don't do those things. But putting that aside, any athlete who's in your program should spend a lot of time warming up. Carl Valley talked about this a long time ago. I can't take credit for it, but it's such an awesome thought about it, is that you want to slow cook the meat, which means probably the most significant time absorber in practice is just warming up for what you're about to do. So there are many times where we spend 45 minutes warming up in practice, and that includes our throwers, by the way. That's also an opportunity for the entire team to come together and do some basic movement skills and drills and activities that allow your athlete to be healthy. So every athlete in my program does a general warm-up. Then we do a suppleness training, which could be static flexibility and dynamic flexibility. We rotate both. So if Monday we do static, Tuesday we do dynamic. And some of you guys like to poo-poo static stretching. Static stretching is just fine. The research done on static stretching has been kind of incorrect. A lot of the studies were based on people holding stretches for 60 to 90 seconds. It's proven that 15 seconds is the best hold for a static stretch. Another thing they found is that, the neurological system's dampened if you do too much static stretching, only if you don't do anything else and then you do a maximal activity after it. So what do we do to avoid that? We reset the neurological system by doing plyometric activity and running drills. So we do our general suppleness, then we have a team huddle where we sit down and we talk to the kids about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it and why we're doing it. Then we go into our drills, and I rotate my drills also. So I have an A package and a B package, so that what happens is every day the kids are alternating these things, so you don't have overuse or boredom set in that reduces the effectiveness of the running drills. And then through the running drills, we'll do different surfaces. So we'll do it on the track, we'll do it on the straightaway, we'll do it on a curve. Then what we also do is we'll go on to the turf, because we were having a lot of shin splint and some stress reactions in the bones and stuff like that. It was a real big problem. Once we moved off the track and started going to some soft surface work, all of a sudden those problems just disappeared. It was just that one tweak that fixed it. Now you can't go on the soft surface all the time, because you got all these athletes going at one time, which eliminates your ability to coach and teach the proper movements of those drills. It also increases the fatigue of some of the hamstring action because they're pawing back. So we rotate that onto the track, which then stacks everybody up. So you've got like a group 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then when they're on the turf, it's like rookies and new kids, and then you have veterans. So the groups are much smaller, so they're going back and forth with a little bit less rest. So when you rotate those things, which can be done very easily, that's a positive. The other thing we do is we take the arms away and we do different hand positions when we're doing drills to kind of take away the arms, which are the training wheels for the body. Once we're done with all of that, then we take our kids and we split them up into their different groups. But if a training day is going to be a hard day, it needs to be really hard. And what I mean by that is that intensity needs to be up. The next day cannot be that same day. It has to be lighter. So if you're doing a tempo run day, that tempo run day needs to be less fatiguing or a different type of action than the day before. When you're doing technical work, if you don't want somebody to get hurt, technical work needs to be done on the least fatigued day as possible. You need to link your themes up with whatever you're doing. So when we do time trials, like a couple weeks ago or last week, we ran a 400 on the day that we typically run our speed endurance workouts. We ran a 200 on the day that we typically run our repeat 200s. We ran the 100 on the day that we typically run our speed power days. And you have to have all your days themed up. All the athletes in your program need to be on the same theme, even if they're in a different event group. Why? Because you don't want a kid to never have a day of rest. If it's just a scatter plot or a shotgunning of all these different exercises and groups and training groups, an athlete can never shift between the two groups, and potentially they could get hurt. So you've got to link them all up. So if I've got a special endurance day for a sprinter, it's going to be a special endurance day for my distance runners or my hurdlers, or it's going to be an extended bound day for my jumpers. Now that's the most ideal. Now we can't match those things up all the time, but we do our best job to do that. We also try to share our athletes, and we set up a plan for our athletes through the assistant coaches that kids we're borrowing, so that they don't go away from us for too long. And then when they come back to us, we try to ask them to do something they haven't done for 2 to 3 weeks. So those are things. Now with the drills, we also use the drills not just to teach technique, but to improve flexibility through a dynamic range of motion, to catch injuries when they prop up. So if I see a kid that seems to be running flat-footed or has a heavy stomp, that's an issue and something we need to be concerned about. We also want to see if they've got a grimace on their face and things like that. So that's things that we do. And we also move through different planes of movement. So we move side to side, back and forth, up and down. And we do that to try to keep people from getting hurt. These are all different things that we do. We lift weights. All of our athletes lift weights, and we cool down. We make sure that they stretch when they cool down, and we use different cool down modalities. We also vary our flexibility and supplements training. We also vary our general warm-up, and we also vary our drills with about 3 to 6 week phases. What does that do to help reduce injury? You're never going to get over usage injuries because you're rotating day to day, and then you're rotating every 3 weeks or 6 weeks with the type of drill or action that they're doing. And just like the conversation we had about the weight room, we also transition that in the track and with the drills off of base level drill. So if they do an A skip and then you want them to do an A skip with a sprint out, or you want them to do an A skip combined with the B skip, or you want them to do an A skip repeater, you can keep doing these different variations, but it all goes back to the same drill, which is an A skip. So that's ways that we try to avoid that. Last thing, there's been a lot of debate in the running community in regards to the coaching of arm swing. What are some of your thoughts? Well, truth be told, arms can only hurt the athlete. They rarely help the athlete. There's some research that's been proven that at full flight running mechanics and at full speed, when the arms are timed correctly, that the arms provide 7% of the lift in the sprint. So arms can definitely mess you up, but we don't want to over cue an athlete to radically change anything about their technique, whether it's arms, legs, head position, any of that stuff, to the point where it slows them down immensely. So when we want to fix technique, the best time to fix technique, if you have them during this time, is in the off season. Andreas over at Altus talked about, in the off season, we work on weaknesses. In the in season, we work on strengths. So if you're trying to change somebody's arm carriage, yeah, it's probably better to do that in the off season. But the reality is that we've had lots of people with goofy arms. You could think of DeGrasse had some goofy arms, and, you know, is a world champion medalist multi-time. He has gotten hurt recently, but he's, you know, I don't know that that had anything to do with his arms. You've got people who have really nice arms like, you know, Usain Bolt and Asafa Powell. And then you have people like Mike Johnson, who has a real goofy arm action, but, you know, he's a world record in 2 events, and a really, really fast guy who, you know, finally stopped running the 100 and stopped doing speed endurance, and got really, really good. He did special endurance and he did short speed. That's what he did. That in-between stuff he avoided. And that was one of the things that Clyde Hart told me when he and I got to have a conversation, which was awesome, that they kind of did. So arm carriage, probably not that big of a deal unless it's just totally limiting their ability to move fluidly. And when you're changing that, it has to be changes over time. It cannot be forced with some kind of contraption or machine or anything like that. Because if you do mess with that, it could lead to more potential injuries. So it has to be something that changes over time. And the reality is that the legs and your body posture matter the most. So if they got goofy arms, but they got a real nice upright body posture, and that leg is cycling really nicely through, heel to the butt, stepping over that knee, good front side mechanics, the arm, it probably doesn't matter. To me personally, like, I want to see good arms out of the blocks, because that, you know, those arms in that body position, they're really pushing the vertical action that's forcing, you know, against the track as you run to upright. But the reality is, as long as the lower half and the posture is good and we don't have a lot of over twisting and rotation, you're probably going to be okay. I know on my Twitter page, I posted that video that compares from 2017 that Eurosport did, comparing Usain Bolt to Tyson Gay. And some people were really upset because, like, well, Tyson Gay's still really fast and it's unfair to compare them. They're both elite. I don't think it is unfair. You know, if you look at Tyson Gay, he spent a lot of time hurt, you know. And I ask the question is, what if he was able to fix those problems over time? You know, I know that he flip-flopped coaches for trying to get out of the blocks, you know, because his block start wasn't great. The technique wasn't great there, and it cost him, you know. And then because it cost him, he's running behind somebody else who's vastly superior, not only in height, but in technique. How much faster could he have been? It's okay to ask that question. It's okay to ask that. But if you radically change things, you also have to realize that you're opening them up to the chance of getting hurt. Last question I have here is on the Sprinters Compendium. You guys know me. If you listen to these videos, you can look up the Sprinters Compendium. If you buy that book, you're not buying it because of me. You're buying it because of the 50 other coaches that are, you know, in the book from all across the planet, the United States. You got excellent coaches like Dan Path, Vince Anderson, Gary Winkler, Sean Burris, Tony Holler, Chris Corfist, great practitioners of speed from around the world and every continent except for the one with penguins on it. So go out there, get the book. The reason why I put the book together is I wanted you guys to realize that there are many roads to Rome, many paths to success. And the reality is you've got to let the athlete show you and reveal what their abilities and talents are, and then you go coach them up within those abilities and talents. That's your job. Your job is to reveal their talent. Does that mean it's always going to go successfully? Of course not. Does that mean that everybody's going to stay healthy? Of course not. You can do all the right things as an athlete, and things can still go badly. You could do all the right things as a coach, and things can go badly. It's part of how it is. But by having a book like this, or a book like, you know, Sean O'Connor's Distance Training Simplified, or the Daniel's Running Formula or Periodization Training with Tudor Bompa and Carlo Buzzicelli. You know, you can get these books and at least get you to narrow down catastrophic errors in training, planning, lesson design. And when you get rid of the training, planning, and lesson design errors, and you start to then play within the margins, now the devil's in the details, and those situations aren't as significant, and you can be really, really successful. So I would suggest, hey, if you want to get my book, great, but also those other books have been mind-blowing and life-changing for me. I know we've got all these book challenges, 7 books in 7 days. I know that's about 4 books. But if you really want to up your coaching game, you're not buying that book just because of me. You're buying it because of the other 50 mentors that I've had through my experiences through social media or face-to-face or clinics or whatever. And all of these people are very valuable, and so are their perspectives. So that's it, guys. I love you. Leave the comments below. Please hit the share button. If you want more information or more videos like this, I rebroadcast all my videos on my YouTube page, Bantasmo.1978. If you click on the little subscribe button there, you'll get updated with all the new things coming down the pipe, which we should have quite a few of those because of, you know, it's track and field season. So we're going to get some stuff on film for you guys. And if there's anything you ever want me to talk about, hit me up. I'm an open book. You know, I don't want you to make the mistakes I made. I want you to learn from them so those errors can be small and that it can just be little things that you need to work on in life. Stand on the shoulders of the guys I stood on, and you're going to have a lot of success. All right. Have a great day. Enjoy your spring break if you're having it.